Welcome to Grassroots Nation, a podcast from Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies, a show in which we dive deep into the life, work, and guiding philosophies of some of our country's greatest leaders of social change. In part 2 of this episode of Grassroots Nation, Rohini Nilekani continues her conversation with Rukmini Banerjee and Madhav Chavan from Pratham. Set up in 1995, Pratham's mission is to see every child in school and learning well. It is a deeply influential organization whose mandate far exceeds its size because of its philosophies and the thinking that have infused its DNA. Since its inception, it has contributed widely to this mission in India, from its early beginnings running Balwadis in Mumbai to being present in over 23 states and union territories, working with various state governments in large-scale initiatives, producing the vital ASER report or the ASER report that annually records the state of education in rural India, and the Read India campaign. In this episode, Rohini, Madhav and Rukmini talk about what it took to set Pratham up, its many champions starting with the Municipal Commission of Mumbai, how the Balwadis were set up, and the operational phenomenon it became as it worked in 3,000 communities across the city. This conversation was recorded at the Bangalore International Centre in Bengaluru.
The first early years, and then of course Rukmini comes in pretty soon. 96 or so you come in. We are in 95 already.
So there are some fundamental things about Pratham, as we remarked. Trust is one in the DNA. Scale is tested. In your head, it is the scale of Mumbai. But the first time the scale and your all these dreams about scale, they are tested. So Mr. Kale called me to his office. Couple of months after we had set up Pratham, January I think. A few weeks after the resolution to create the organization was passed. And he said, Madhav, this is a budget time and I want to know if we are going to do this. We are told that 2.5 lakh children are out of school. But if all these children have to come to school, then do we have enough schools? Do we have good schools? Do we have clean schools? So the whole thing was about, do we have enough? So I'm saying, so what? So he said, no, you tell me. I said, how do I tell you? He said, you have to go and visit all the schools. And I said, 1,200 schools, Mr. Kale. I have only 10 people working with me. And not even seriously. I mean, how do I do this? He said, that's not my problem. You went and told in the meeting that you can create a societal mission and all that. Now create it. This is actually true. And I didn't know what to do then. And he wanted it before budget time. Budget, as you know, is in February. I said, for budget time to hoga nahi, but okay, he said, do what you can. Question is, how do you survey 485 buildings in which 1,200 schools are housed? We could do it, but it has to be credible, etc., etc. And there was a young lady called Shilpa Sakharkar. She was a student of Farida's from Nirmala Niketan. Again, let me tell you, people do all the thinking. It's not like you're as a central person of it. And Shilpa said, sir, I have a friend who is a doctor. Why don't we ask doctors to volunteer to survey the schools? It is completely out of the left field, right? What? But I thought that was and she argued that there are homeopathic doctors and there are Unani doctors and all kinds of doctors. And they take afternoons off, go home to sleep. So why can't we ask them to spare their afternoon? This was her idea, Shilpa's idea. And I said, let's try it. So we asked for an appointment with the Indian Medical Association at Mahalakshmi, and they were incredulous. They said, what? You think we are sanitation inspectors or what? I said, no. But if you, the doctors, say the schools are clean, everybody will believe because you have no, vested interest in it. But if you say that the schools are not clean, then the administration will be forced to accept that your judgment must be good. And they said yes. And a letter went out from IMA saying that please volunteer. I remember many of my classmates were physicians also, surgeons and so on. So they started calling and they said, okay, we will participate. So we got some 350 doctors volunteering to go to these buildings in the afternoon. And we got the survey results on my one laptop that I brought. So उस पे data entry किया, And in 3 months' time, we submitted the data, which said 75% schools of Mumbai are good, which was shocking. How can you say that? Actually, my doctor friends called up on the phone and said, you know what? Thank you for giving us this opportunity to go to schools, because we had never seen a municipal school, although we lived there. And somebody said, but have you been to the urinals there? They stink. They said, okay, tell me, this is some doctors actually saying, show us a urinal in India that doesn't stink. So what are we comparing this with, and why are we doing that? And all this thinking was happening at the grassroots. And this is also educational for me, because people are positive. People are not always negative about things. They have a very good view of how things should be and what. Otherwise, you will go by what press reports say. Anyway, so this was the first time that the circumstances are no money, no people, and don't know what to do. And yet you go about and take a challenge and say, do it.
You found abundance and scarcity.
Aha, okay. Yeah, what's abundant is that scarcity. And so you have to use that scarcity. So the question was, then what? So we were told, go teacher training karo. I had no clue about education. A teacher training kaun karega? So since Farida was the social worker, she knew many NGOs, many institutions, and so we said what to do. Teacher training karo. Okay, teacher training. So the municipal corporation said, okay, jao teacher training karo. And the training started. And I was visiting the training programs, and I was wondering, between sessions at tea time, people were telling us, children come to our schools without being potty trained also. They don't know how to sit, how to listen. And you are asking us to give quality education. Whose idea is this? So why don't you do something concrete, constructive, give children preschool education? In one shot, they gave us a good idea about education. And second thing said, get out of our way and let us do our work and don't get into it. So there again, that was an idea that came from the school teachers. You have to listen. Very often we don't listen. We come up with our own ideas and say, ye karo, wo karo. But there's a lot that the teachers have to say, but you have to listen properly. And then you're okay. So once we decided that, okay, preschool education is to be done. How? Again, the same thing. There was a model that the municipal corporation already had. There were what are known as CDOs, Community Development Officers, some 21 of them. And they were running this model in the municipal schools. They used to make a school room available for the community Balwadi. For Balwadis. The Balwadi model actually came from there. So they used to find somebody who was trained or something and then said, okay, you can run a Balwadi class in the school as long as, and you can charge 5 rupees. That was also a part of it. You can charge 5 rupees, keep the money for you. We are not employing you. And you start teaching the children, and the condition is that after the children finish their 1 year of preschool, they have to go to the municipal school. That was a bad thing. Bad thing, matlab you can't tell people ki idhar hi aana chahiye. I said, why don't you take this to scale? You have the schools, you have the buildings, but they were not willing to do. And that is when I said, okay, we will take it to scale. The same idea, we can't do it in the municipal schools, but can we do it in the slum communities? All the elements of what that model were used. So we found the young ladies in the slums and said, you find the children you want to teach, and you can charge them any fees that the parents are willing to pay and keep the fees as your own. We'll give you some 100 rupees a month. And that is how the Balwadi model started. There was a need and it was on fire. I mean, everybody just wanted to do it.
Because also it was a very simple model. And
again, I want to stress that it was a model that existed before. We just simply took it and ran with it.
And it's good to call out. There's a truism that only the market or civil society can innovate. But we have already seen 2 or 3 examples where good people inside the state system are innovating. And in fact, they're probably innovating around the country all the time. We don't necessarily call that innovation. But you pick that innovation up, and then you put it out into the community.
Absolutely. So that's how the Balwadi program started, and with that Balwadi program, we could prove, this was a proof of concept, that an NGO can actually work on a very large scale. Right. because within a matter of 2 to 3 years, we were at 3,000, 3,500 balwadis. And not only that, our numbers, and actually we could show children, there was some 55, 56,000 children in the balwadis. And then the government schools, the municipal schools started saying, ye kuch mein dam hai kuch. So then they were more willing to work with us.
And now does this predate the Anganwadis?
Anganwadi program already existed.
Yeah.
And not in Mumbai so much, but around the country, in the rural areas, Anganwadi was universalized 91, 92.
See, the urban Anganwadis are much more recent. Yeah. Bombay has the problem that if you're an unauthorized settlement, then how much government services can come? So that may have been another issue for why.
In those days, that was then discarded.
And then later, of course, the free and compulsory, all those restrictions were lifted for government work. But yeah, so there was other preschool activity already happening around the country. So the Anganwadi system through other NGOs.
ICDS was already there. This was Integrated Child Development Scheme, and then that was called Anganwadi.
Yes.
We were urban.
And it is a volunteer, more or less volunteer-driven model inside the community.
It was.
Yeah. One of you describe a typical Balwadi of those days.
So, a space, usually, and of course nobody paid any rent for the space. So the spaces could be the room in which the Balwadi teacher used to live. But to have that space, you had to get all your family members out. So you need cooperation even at that level. Lots of verandas. We discovered at that time that political parties all have offices in the slums, but no political party is actually active in the morning. That activity picks up towards the afternoon and evening. So often political party offices could be used. There was a police station somewhere in Kurla which said, "Aap jagah dhoond rahe ho, to hamare yahan kar sakte ho." Again, obviously not a great place to run a Balwadi in the police station, but there was space, people were willing. So any and every space, and there were constraints. If a 3-year-old child had to walk, it had to be very close to their house. So what is the kind of space that you could find there? So a very large number actually were in people's homes. But there as well, you needed, as I said, the collaboration of everybody else in the house to get out for 2 hours so that you could have that space. And so a little space, a local Balwadi teacher who tended to be a young woman usually. And,
was that like 90-95% women?
Almost 100%.
For example, I remember a case where this was in Chembur, where there was a transgender who wanted to be a Balwadi teacher, and the community was fine with it. So the issue was, can that person become or not become? And my point was, who are we to decide anything? The space, the children, everything is being done. As long as the parents are okay with any of this, it is okay with us. So lots and lots of young women, lots and lots of turnover. So, we had something like, 3,000, 3,500. Almost when we calculated 1,200 would turn over every year. And I remember the team going to Madhav saying that, kitna training karenge? Jaise hi train karte hain, sab log change ho jate hain. And he told our Balwadi team that nothing is lost, because these are the reason there is a turnover is unki shaadi ho rahi hai, they are moving, they are having children, whatever. So this is actually investment in young mothers. So nothing is going waste. So I don't know to what extent the team was convinced, but I think it was.
No, we've seen it later in years that people have come back and said, "It helped me. I'm a better mother."
And then there were children 10, 12 of different ages.
Children at that age are small and they're thin, and so you can fit in quite a few in one place, but never more than 20. The space itself was also, and also managing little children more than that
very difficult
would be difficult. So it was usually 18, 20, 15, and usually the Balwadi teacher was very known to all the mothers.
And people paid money?
Some did, some didn't. Some did quite a lot. Whereas sometimes there was this thing कि हमारे बच्चों को uniform होना चाहिए. So it was all settled locally. That as long as you didn't leave anybody out, whatever you were doing. I remember one story about this is an area, where when you're leaving Bombay, where the garbage dump is. So we used to do a lot of surveys at that time कि इसलिए यहाँ पे ज़रूरत है या कितने बालवाड़ियों की ज़रूरत है. And in the hunting for all of that, you'd also find potential instructors, because people would say कि क्या कर रहे हो, तो हमें जगह चाहिए, बच्चे चाहिए, आप लोगों को बालवाड़ी चाहिए कि नहीं, and so on. So there was one such slum called Rafiq Nagar, which had, I mean, we were able to help set up almost 20 to 30 balwadis in one slum. It was a very crowded, but absolutely everybody lived in plastic sheets. And the girl who was the Pratham person organizing in this area, her name was Ghazala Amin, her name was. And she one day said to me कि ये बालवाड़ी है तो ये तो प्री स्कूल है, तो मुझे नहीं अच्छा लगता कि सारे बच्चे फटे कपड़े में आ रहे हैं, गंदे आ रहे हैं, and all this. तो उसी से मैं कुछ करूँगी. Few weeks later she came back and she told me हो गया इंतजाम. So I said क्या हुआ? She lived like 2 slums away. She raised a huge clothing drive and got clothes for close to 500-600 children. So that ये फटे कपड़े मुझे अच्छे नहीं लगते. So she got that. Then after some time she said नहीं, यूनिफॉर्म होना चाहिए. अभी ठीक है, कपड़े तो हो गए, अब यूनिफॉर्म होना चाहिए. So I said अब तुम ही रास्ता निकालो. He said वो तो मुझे पता है, मुझे ही निकालना पड़ेगा. That girl managed to actually get fabric from whoever, and she just said कि यार ना, if in my area ना मुझे ढंग से चीज चाहिए, तो मैंने करा लिया. That's it.
The problem of the Balwadi was threefold. There was no space. Then in the slums, there were no trained teachers. And this is what all the experts were telling us. There's no trained teachers and there's no money which could buy any of these things. So if none of these are present, then how do you even think of scale? So you just say that these problems don't exist. You just wipe them off and say, okay, let's start with what they have. This is what I talk about. The Lao Tzu poem, go to the people, love them, learn from them. Start with what they know, build on what they have, and when it is done, they will say, we did it ourselves. Now that is actually a principle that I like to use, because if you trust that this is their problem, they are going to solve it, then you should say that, okay, I'll help you. You said, okay, there's no space, so who's going to do the space? The community will find the space. In this, Sharad Kale, the municipal commissioner, was my biggest ally. He said, don't worry about cleanliness. Nobody knows what cleanliness is. If people are living there, that's clean enough for them, then they will find a place for their children. Don't worry about it. These were important lessons to be learned. Where is the teacher training? Nahi hai. They are not trained teachers. This is where UNICEF came in. Vijaya Chauhan told me, it doesn't matter, we'll do a short training program. And what training do you need? We just need children to be comfortable with somebody, play, sing, dance. That's all you want. That was the second one. And then the third one was money. So money was a problem. I went to Bombay Community Public Charitable Trust, which had set up by Mr. Parikh, Deepak Parikh. Deepak Parikh's uncle, H.T. Parikh. And the gentleman who was running the trust was Mr. Palia, who was the former executive director of IDBI. So I said, I need to set up as a proof of concept 200 balwadis. So he said, how long will it take? I said, 3 months. He said, what? That's not possible. People spend a lifetime setting up 25 balwadis, and you're saying you want to set up 200 balwadis in 3 months? Not possible. I said, let's take a bet. And he actually agreed. So Mr. Palia said, okay, I'll give you 2 lakh rupees. If you set up 100 balwadis in the next month and a half, I'll give you the remaining 2 lakh rupees. I said, okay. And I came back to the office and I told everybody, you set up 100 balwadis in the next 2 months, I'll take you to Taj for dinner or lunch or whatever. And everybody said, okay, let's do it. They did the 100 balwadis. No Taj lunch even till now.
Rukmini, what are the big lessons you took away? And today we have come to Nipun Bharat, FLN is talked about all the time, foundational learning. But tell us, what is the biggest lessons from the whole Balwadi movement of Pratham?
But I think looking back, I think that big things is this carpet across the community then generated a lot more other demands. And the carpet also, the forming of that carpet, this idea was that, if every child in Bombay has preschool, then they will go to first standard. So universalizing elementary education, this was, I don't know if other people did it this way, but I think certainly in our heads it was, every child has a Balwadi, they will naturally go to first. So every child has a Balwadi, ko kaise hum establish karenge? One was this, how do you influence people? How do people join you? But I think, at least in my mind, there was also a little bit of a continuous, how do we know what we know, and are we seeing the right thing? And, of the many things that need to be done, are we the best people to be doing what it is that we are doing? So there were two things that we did in 98, which were very, to me, very, very interesting. One was one way to find out if every child is in a Balwadi or not. Bombay is a very organized slum culture. Yeah. Everywhere there is some Rehwasi Sangh, Mahila Mandal, Yuvak Mandal, some, Mandal is always there, which is not there in many other slums in many other parts of the country. So basically, in every slum in Bombay, whoever was the resident, whoever was the association that represented the residents was asked कि आपके यहाँ पे कोई है क्या जो बालवाड़ी है क्या, and बालवाड़ी में नहीं जाता ऐसा कोई. We had stacks and stacks of files in the office, letterheads of little and big organizations saying कि हमारे यहाँ पे नहीं है. So again, take a look around in your own community. अपने आप से आप बताओ कि है कि नहीं. So that was one. The second one was that Bombay had 1,200 schools and about 2,000 first standard sections. And by the first method, it was like almost there was 98 Children's Day. November 14, there was a big rally in which a lot of our Balwadi teachers came, lots of people came. It was also a time in Bombay's municipal history when the elected people were almost decision makers. Otherwise, bureaucrats used to take decisions. That phase in Bombay's history, I don't know what it is. But there was elected people from several parties. I mean, it seemed like there was a combination of bureaucrats, other people who were there in this rally. And the rally was to declare that, almost every child has access to preschool. So one was what people said from the slums, and a very systematic way, कि every slum से लेके आओ, उसको file करो, and so on. And the other thing we did a little bit after that was to look at every first standard, to say कि जो बच्चा भी first standard में enroll हो रहा है, वो किसी बालवाड़ी से आया है कि नहीं. There we discovered big gaps. And then the analysis of that gap was also interesting. Bombay ran schools in 8 languages and still does. So some of the gaps were that I am a Telugu speaking slum, but there is no first standard in Telugu close to me. Then there would be children who would, that kind of, there were big language gaps. And then there were recent migrant gaps, because you often had just arrived in the city and you couldn't. So this one systematic view from the sending location and one view from the receiving location, the two together, put together, we realized now in a focused way where to work. So during this Balwadi stuff also, I think, is what were simple mechanisms which allowed you and everybody else who's involved in this to take a look at, I remember there was 3,500 Balwadis. ढंग से चल रहे हैं कि नहीं चल रहे हैं? चला तो रहे हो आप लोग, तो कैसे पता चलेगा? There was a couple of young McKinsey interns who had been given to us, and they came up with some metrics, and everybody loved those McKinsey boys in the office because they were all smart young men wearing nice shirts and all that. So people get irritated with me when I said, क्या बोल रहे हैं ये लोग? नहीं, don't, बैठने दो उनको, अच्छे लोग हैं. But at the same time, I remember I was very interested in these kind of measurement things. So I had 50 Balwadi teachers from across Bombay, and we sat down and said कि आप बताओ कि बालवाड़ी में अच्छी बालवाड़ी क्या होती है? And people came up and blah blah blah, and I said 10 से ज़्यादा नहीं होना चाहिए. In fact, उससे भी कम होता है तो better है. Came up with 10 indicators, and sweet McKinsey boys aside, 6 were common between what the Balwadi teachers produced and what the consulting company did. But the good thing about what the Balwadi teachers produced is that they owned it. And then it was very easy to say कि ये जो बना है, ये हम ही लोगों ने बनाया अपने आप के लिए. And the words or whatever it is was simple. So again, working with 3,500, how to do training that made sense, how to do assurance to yourself, it's not for anybody else, that things are more or less going okay. And then how to listen to the demands that were coming. कि छोटे बच्चों के लिए आपने कर दिया, but मेरे बच्चे स्कूल जा रहे हैं, वो ठीक से नहीं हो रही है जो होना चाहिए वहाँ, but मुझे नहीं पता कि ठीक से क्या नहीं हो रही है, तो उसको करो. बड़े बच्चे हैं जिनको भी स्कूल में डालना है, पर उनकी तैयारी कौन करेगा? आप तो छोटे बच्चों का कर रहे हो. So the two other major programs that happened in Bombay after that, one was called bridge courses. Again, it was not our idea. Shanta Sinha and MV Foundation were doing it in rural areas. We saw it, we learnt it, we modified it. How can you do that for Bombay slums? And the second was in-school support, which was also probably one of the first in India to provide, to recognize that वो नहीं हो रहा है जितना अच्छी तरह से हो रहा है, होना चाहिए, and enabling and allowing community volunteers to actually come to the school as part of the school time to be able to do this. So these were all, I think, this how to create a carpet, how to know the carpet is more or less okay, how to keep changing how you look at it. What about other needs that communities are saying? Are you going to respond? Are you not going to respond? I think to a large extent, we were driven by what people wanted. And then we had to scramble to say, okay, to the extent I know, what to do.
The main thing is when you're working on a large scale, we learned to work on a large scale. Thinking of scale was not a problem, but when you get down there, you have to pay attention to detail. And how do you get everybody to pay attention to that detail? That is the question. So simple things like 100 rupees to be paid to every Balwadi teacher, 3,000 teachers to be paid every month. So you're paying 100 rupees physically. How do you get the receipt? Who's going to believe that? What should the receipt be like? So the teacher used to say, I am so and so, I'm running a Balwadi here, and I have so many children in my class, and so many children attended the Balwadi last month or whatever, and I have received 100 rupees. So that was a report come a receipt.
But in this detail, coupon में Rohini signs today in English, tomorrow in Marathi, and day after tomorrow in Urdu. तो वो Rohini same Rohini है कि कोई और है? Children's names as they are going from Balwadi to school. So we have enrolled 30,000 children. But school के register में इनका नाम नहीं मैच कर रहा है because community में उसका नाम पिंकू है. School में जाते तो उसका नाम नताशा हो गया. So we then started recording nicknames. बच्चे का nickname so that we can tag. Sorry.
There are sometimes very simple but big lessons. So on this receipt things, fraud, some people may, do all kinds of things. I was talking to Mr. Vagul at that time. He was chairman of ICICI then. It was not ICICI Bank yet. ICICI was Industrial Credit Investment Corporation of India Limited. Okay. And he became chairman of Pratham. He joined the board first and then he became the chairman. So I was discussing these kinds of things with him because that's another lesson, how we started getting money even. But Mr. Vagul's important observation was, he said, look, Madhav, all these frauds and all these things, irregularities don't happen in business. They do. So don't let people scare you too much. These things happen when you do on a large scale. What you can do is you can protect yourself. You can create mechanisms. You can train people not to do things. But don't be afraid of those things. And that was very important because otherwise you're making payments in 3,000 locations or ordinary things. So there will be something that will be lost. And you have to do something about it.
So Pratham put out a vision statement, every child in school. And there is such a powerful ring to it. Most people have very complicated sort of goal setting. How did you come to it?
I was sitting in the office writing something, doing some work. And there was this volunteer who was working at the McKinsey. She came into the office and said, Madhav, I'm typing out a newsletter and I need a tagline. I said, I don't have time now. She said, no, just think of something. And this was all in the air, right? Private education is the best investment a country can make and all that was there already. So I said, okay, let's write down every child in school. Now that seemed incomplete. And I said, okay, every child in school and learning. That learning was not a part of our conscious decision. But the sentence seemed incomplete and learning as a requirement was good. So she wrote it down. And then 4 years later, one Mr. Rajan, who was a trustee of Delhi, he was ex-UNICEF. He said, learning is not enough. Well done.
because now we are already starting to think about outcomes. Learning से क्या होगा और क्या हो रहा है, क्या learning. So then it became every child in school and learning well.
Yeah.
So let's move to, many civil society organizations grapple with expansion, and a lot of it is to do with the development of people in their organizations. How did you become, what will you tell us about leadership lessons, not just about becoming leaders yourselves, but about creating so many other leaders in the organization?
So the former Secretary of Education, late Kumud Bansal, so she used to say, Madhav has a trick. He goes out and he gets all these young ladies to work, and then they makes them responsible and lets them handle all the different programs. The real feature is that, you tell a person, go ahead and start, and you get, what is the loss? The way I did it, I can say that, you make a person responsible, say, will you do it? Yes, I'll do it. Our Balwinder Singh, the accountant, head accounts now, was exactly that. When he was doing accounts, at one point, Bala left, I think. Somebody, the more responsible person left. And we had to hire a new person. I asked Balwinder, can you handle it? He said, yeah, I can handle it. So I said, go ahead and do it. If you mess up, we'll see what to do. So I think making people responsible and helping them to do their work is the best thing to be done.
So lessons of leadership, both how you develop as a leader and how you make other people into such fine leaders.
There is a journey. There's a learning journey. You actually don't know where you're headed. You can just see the next thing. And you're not alone in this. There is a whole bunch of people. And my early year time in Bombay, I think, was very critical. There was a girl called Pratima Bandekar, who was from, people who had worked with Madhav earlier. She had a very sort of thin, loud voice. And I remember her saying to me at least 5 times a month, तुम्ही कुठे होता तुम्हाला काहीच माहिती नाही. That where the hell were you? You don't know anything. So this whole business about how do you learn, who helps you to learn, who's pushing you, who's challenging you. So the team building, again, I don't think we ever had a team building workshop, but I think being thrown in the deep end builds good teams. I see this even till today. I think out of that being thrown in the deep end, some people, normally they do something, but then here comes a big new thing to do. Different people rise. So if the landscape is big, you can actually grow many people grow. I shouldn't say you grow people. Many people grow themselves. There are some people who like to work in small is beautiful. Then what is that place that they remain in? And there are people who want to go and conquer the whole world. So how do you let them, free to do that?
This fundraising machine of yours, what all elements does it have? Because most people would love to be where Pratham is in terms of learning how to do fundraising, which is one of the most difficult things for social sector organizations. How do you do it so well?
I think there are very few people in Pratham who are not doing some form of resource mobilization. That's probably a better word than fundraising. The actual fundraising arm, the Pratham USA, which has also gone through a lot of leadership changes and evolution.
So Pratham has 14 chapters in the USA, locally run by communities there.
Model is slightly different, but yes, there is a local leadership, and locally they organize fundraisers, they raise money, some help coming from the central organization, and so on and so forth.
But there is, I would say that there it is, again, this local infection. You are my friend. You may not have a great regard for education or India or whatever, but you have great regard for your friend. So just like our Balwadi teachers often joined this campaign, not because they had a great desire to do Desh Seva or whatever, but it is, अगर मेरी friend कर सकती है तो मैं भी कर सकती हूँ, मेरे friend को मजा आ रहा है तो मुझे भी आएगा, and you form a part of a team. And there as well, there is always a tension that we have as well, is how much should be centrally decided and how much should be locally decided. There is no magic bullet. You have to balance, how much should be volunteer-led, how much should be staff-led. As soon as you feel that there is too many people in the staff raising funds, everybody feels it's their job to do it.
In the next segment, the conversation between Rohini Nilekani, Madhav Chavan, and Rukmini Banerjee continues as they talk about ASAR, the annual State of Education report, and the deep impact it has made on the landscape of education in India. The ASAR report is a nationwide household survey that captures the status of children's enrollment and learning outcomes in rural India, and it has changed the landscape of how we understand the impact of our educational policies and programs. And finally, they share their thoughts on the future of education in India.
What is it about the Pratham narrative, the story, that attracts funders?
So I think the one that has succeeded in our case is the fundraising, the retail fundraising in the US. And there, I believe the biggest strength is that there are owners in each chapter who pass on that trust. They basically say, I believe in this organization, so give. So the guy who gives us out $1,000, $500 is not thinking of everything, your educational learning outcomes or your efficiency, not every time. But it's a family. It gets together and contributes to, help Pratham. And they do it year after year after year.
Okay. Do you think if you had more resources, say if you doubled your budget, you could do more?
See, I'll tell you where we really lack direct funding is these partnerships that you do today with governments, tomorrow it may be with large-scale campaigns and so on. I would like to think that where we have contributed a lot, which is this very large thing. UP को change करने के लिए हमने, challenge ले लिया. That is very difficult to find funding for. It comes from people who believe in Pratham and say कि तुम decide करो. You think changing UP is very important, तो ले लो. कर लो. And at some level, I'm not questioning तुम उसको कैसे कर रहे हो because it's too big a thing. So these ASAR has never received that kind of funding because it's not a concrete thing that I changed these lives. And yet something like ASAR has played a major role in the landscape, of whatever education is in India. Large-scale government partnerships, big community campaigns. These are where I think we've built the know-how from all the other things we do, and then you unleash it in some campaign form.
So ASAR is the annual
Status of Education report. Acronym is ASAR.
The Annual Status of Education report is the largest annual survey of rural children done by the citizens of India every year since 2005.
It's also, the acronym is very important. I mean, it's the acronym that was created first and then the English came later to say it must have an impact.
How does ASAR start?
So it starts with arriving in Bombay and, being told कि तुम्ही कुठे होता, तुम्हाला काहीच माहिती नाही. You don't know anything. And also with my own perception that I need to understand this context. Now, to me, because I was very familiar with North India, it seemed to me like Bombay schools were all in good buildings, quite, well-trained teachers and so on. So I took upon this. I said, I have to learn my own curriculum. So we took some 20 schools in Andheri West, which if you look at all of Bombay is actually not one of the worst places of Bombay. And that also because there was a couple of by then senior people of Pratham who were in that area who could help because I needed some help with Marathi. We did a very simple assessment of children and all it was actually for my own learning rather than for any big program or anything like that. And what came out was the fact that the school looked good, the teachers looked good, the children looked good, but they couldn't do simple math.
From start to finish, ASAR takes about 100 days. Every year, ASAR asks children whether they are enrolled in school. ASAR also asks children to read a simple text and do some very basic arithmetic tasks.
And that was quite a shock. And I remember putting it on one sheet and going to our YV Chavan office. I was fresh, recent PhD for 6 years. This one sheet of paper, within, I think, 10 days, the municipal corporation had launched a program called Shatak Jhep, Jump to 100, based on this. And I remember at night thinking, geez, I hope I added up the numbers correctly and so on. So I think this exploring schooling and learning together, every child in school and learning well, learning whatever, thinking about it together, thinking about what can be done to solve it. All of these things happened together. So there was this early assessment in Bombay, combined with Shatak Jhep, to how do you come up with a solution. There was listening to parents who were saying, बच्चे स्कूल तो जा रहे हैं, पर वो नहीं हो रहा है ठीक से जो होना चाहिए. coming to the first randomized control trial that happened with Abhijit and Esther in 99-2000, where that was also an attempt to look at, okay, schools are full of children, but what is going on inside? Village report cards, which we then decided that, no, actually, one more point would be that around 2001-2, we were very frustrated with the pace of progress on learning that we were able to do. And it seemed like we were incrementally doing various things, but it wasn't, it wasn't enough. It wasn't sufficient. So at some point in that 2001-2, we stopped, took a complete stop, and about, I don't remember now, 200-300 people said, let's start again. And let's start with a group of 20-25 kids, all 8 or older, some in school, some out of school, wherever they may be. And let's see what we can do in a month. Now, month, why month? Because month is just a unit. And, if you're not going to do whatever you were doing, so do it for a month. And we had to then come to a common vocabulary of what it is that we were going to do. And so what you know today as the Asar tool was actually a way to communicate to each other, that this is the path we want to go down. If you want to describe when children can't read, what is it? It's like they can't read letters, they can't read words, they can't read a sentence. So that whole exercise was really our own understanding of how shall we talk in a common language about children and their progress. And how can it be very simple? Because there were many different kinds of people in this. So it has to be kept very simple. And it was not designed necessarily as an assessment tool. But as we began to iterate it and use it, we saw it was very beneficial to us to track children's progress over and up. But it had a lot of other benefits. Parents said, "Kar kya rahe ho?" We could say, "Yahan se yahan tak leke ja rahe hain." Children themselves were aware that this is a progression. So this development of this tool and the solution that we evolved along with it, then we could see that it could work at a local level. It could be used by us. But if this is such a powerful thing, then hum apne liye kyun rakhein? Then on the one hand, we started figuring out how can we work on this with governments, with other NGOs and so on. This whole process, ki understand the problem and solve it using, at that point we called it learning to read. Later on we called it Read India, then it was called Kamal, teaching at the right level. All of this is how do you accelerate the reading and the arithmetic. And on the other hand, it was clear to us that if you understand the problem, then you start worrying about a solution. So if you don't have a question, the answer doesn't help. So I think around 2002, 3, 4, these two things came out of that original, what shall we do? How shall we understand the problem and how shall we think of a solution that went that way? Okay. And then various things, but like leaning to 2005.
So we were doing it in urban areas, but for some, I don't remember how, but we were in 120 rural districts of India at that time. And 2004, when the government changed and UPA government took charge, two things Dr. Manmohan Singh declared that his government was going to measure its performance based on outcomes and not outlays. And I thought that was a very good idea. Luckily, I got inducted into the National Advisory Council as well. And I started telling the government at that time, why can't you use, we have this tool to measure children's learning, and let's see if we can measure outcomes, because learning is an important part of education. So can we improve education? Can we improve the learning outcomes? At that time, the government said that if you try to take us with you, we'll just create a burden on you. Rather than that, you do it and we'll watch what you do and we'll support you. And this is particularly Montek Singh Ahluwalia. He said, if you try to take the government and do these things, this won't work. But so we got the Planning Commission on board and all that, and we said, okay, we will show you a test case. 120 districts, we did a test case and we gave a report to the Planning Commission. And Planning Commission said, this is very good. So what about the rest of the country? And we said, okay, we'll do. I came back to the office, I remember, in the Delhi office, and I asked everybody, we are in 120 districts, 600 is required. So why not? Let's do it. So it was just a decision taken, and within 3 months, we completed the whole mobilization survey, report, everything. And I remember asking Montek Singh Ahluwalia, if we are going to release this report, I want your date. When will you come and release? And he said, can't believe this. You've not even started anything. I said, you give me your date So you were there at the first release. So, and it actually worked out like that, exactly like the first time we did the survey in Mumbai. And so we decided, okay, the whole team has to go out and do these things. The volunteer mobilization was not even planned. People were sent to different parts of the country. They went to different districts, different states, and they just grabbed hold of whoever was willing to go and do the survey, and we got it. So that was the first time. Then it became much better organized. And the simplicity of the tool and reliance on voluntary energy, that's what worked for it.
You know, we all who have been in the education, we must do deep reflection that after so much effort, the Samaj has in so many others. Pratham is just one instance, big instance, but of how much civil society action has happened in the Samaj for education, early and middle school. Similarly, Bazaar also has got very interested. Sarkar has been doing so, and still we are at a stage, not just in India but globally. What is fundamentally, what are we missing that all children are not being able to learn?
No. So I think that one is the way the system delivers, but what is the objective of the system? Yeah. I believe the objective of the system is not every child learning well. It is some children learning well. We have, at least in India, our whole system is designed to enable certain people to, some small chunk to succeed. We do this bifurcation very early. By third standard, 70% children are already clear they're not going to make it. The system does not invest in those.
We are teaching some kinds of things in our school, like every child needs to know the same things. And when you leave the school and come back home, it's still fairly agrarian, the country. You need to know something completely different. Is that part of it?
Yes, I think that is the part of it, because the question is, we are testing through ASAR, let's relate it to ASAR, or now even Nipun Bharat and everything. We are measuring progress based on a dipstick survey of your ability to read. The question is, what should children learn? Let's ask that. And during the pandemic, the schools were closed for 2 years. Basically, then third graders now in 22-23 should know nothing if everything happens in school. But that's not the case. The difference is only 7%. So is there something else happening? And we are testing what we know how to test.
Is it something to do with a mismatch between what the system says we should know or children should know and what children really need to know in a era of very complex, rapid change, where maybe just learning how to learn is enough? And we don't know how to really teach children to learn how to learn in very different contexts and circumstances.
I also think that there is, this universalizing elementary education. Every child in school has come with many more things other than just children in school. And one of them is incredibly high aspirations for what will happen once all children are in school. And a lot of that is coming from parents who haven't had much education themselves, but have seen that when people finish 8th, 10th, unka to dunya badal jata hai. And therefore, that is what I want for my children. And education cannot let me down, because that's the only path that I've seen that works. So this high aspirations, I would say that today there is nobody in India who wants their children to have less than 15 years of education. Talk to 14, 15, 16, 18-year-olds. And despite whatever experiences they may have had as young children, I am stunned as to how many people say exam mein baithenge, qualify karenge, and fir aage badhenge. If you say aage badhenge, in the army in India, you can only recruit 40,000 people a year. Lakhs of people are applying, but I'll be the successful one. Right. So this very high aspiration, use of resources which are very scarce to feed that aspiration, which is not going to get to its ultimate. I think this is building.
So what is the future of Pratham?
So I think we have to look at what we are doing today or can do tomorrow in the context of where India is also, right? So one is that I believe that this new education policy, it is up to people like us and many others to not let it remain a policy, because at least the early goals are very doable. So at some level, I think in the early childhood and in this basic, reading, writing, we know what to do. We've to get it done. It will take time within the government. You have to still push. But I think rest of the country is ready for these pushes. And everything that we are doing in the community, I see a lot of potential. For example, young mothers today, mothers of children who are 3 to 8, are not like mothers of 15 years ago. They are beneficiaries of having been through this universalization process. They have high aspiration. They also have some skills which are not being tapped into sufficiently. We also have very low female labor force participation. For a whole variety of the reasons, these young women, who are also youth, are trapped in their local circumstance. So unleashing that potential could be one big force that helps Nipun Bharat actually happen. So if you assume that Nipun Bharat can happen, which means that for this generation of 3 to 8, if you solve this basic problem, they will engage with good, bad, ugly education system in a totally different way. If you're at grade level in India, you can go quite far. Jobs, etc., still need to be tackled. I think in a mental, in an intellectual way, in a mental way, in a conceptual way, some of the things that Madhav is saying, and much bigger, we have to totally rethink what happens after basics. And not only what you learn, which is important, but how you learn. Because that world outside is not an individual world. Our education system is individual excellence and academic oriented. But what the world needs is actually learning how to work in groups, learning how to solve things locally. I think we were ahead of our time with Asar.
Yes.
We were ahead of our time with teaching at the right level. And I think on that growth front, we have to come up with convincing models for ourselves. Whether other people take it or not,
yes.
What can kids who've gone through whatever it is we think they should go through, what do they do next, is something that we really have to work on. So one is help everybody else implement the lower stuff, which we know what to do. It needs to get done. And then very, very actively engage with this 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. What is going to happen to that?
Yes.
So Pratham has to move beyond basics while staying with the basics.
Dusra and Tisra.
And what Pratham did will be taken over by the mothers in the next 20 years.
Dvitiya, we should say. After Pratham is Dvitiya and Tritiya, and you have to move now. Okay, we very much look forward to the evolution of Pratham. We thank you, Madhav and Rukmini, for sharing all your insights, and thank you for being part of this podcast.
Thank you to everybody for listening.
Thank you very much.
Grassroots Nation is a podcast from Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. For more information, go to rohininilekani-philanthropies.org or join the conversation on social media at RNP_Foundation. Thank you for listening to Grassroots Nation.